welcome Rich, along with Charles, Jordan, Prashant, and Candice.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're here this afternoon to talk about the electronic Silk Road. I've got an excellent panel here with me. On my far left is Jordan Dea-Mattson. Jordan is the Vice President of Engineering at Carousell, which is one of the world's largest and fastest growing classified apps. 57 million listings and are present in 19 countries around the world. Jordan's a relative newcomer to Singapore, and we'll come to that shortly. Next to Jordan is Prashant Dadlani, the CEO of Blue, which describes itself as the future of retail logistics. Candice Ong is the Chief Commercial Officer for ShopBack, a shopper reward startup based here in Singapore. And then on my immediate left here is Charles Brewer, the CEO of DHL eCommerce. DHL, of course, which says it wants to be the logistics company for the world. So, plenty to talk about. And what I would like to start by discussing is what we actually mean by the Silk Road, because that's an expression that was coined in the 19th century, and it was traditionally goods moving from Asia over west. Is that still the case? Are we still talking about goods moving Asia west, or are we talking about movement within Asia itself? Candice?
Well, maybe I think the term road is a little bit of a misnomer. Road seems to imply linearity. I don't think Silk Road is very much about a linear equation, but rather a network or confluence of paths and connections of hubs, really. And I think these hubs are where value and commerce is created. And I think in that analogy towards, I guess, the digital economy in Southeast Asia, the hubs are the different countries, perhaps, and online media connects these areas and connects businesses in the digital world as well.
President Xi Jinping said in 2013 that he wanted to recreate the Silk Road. But are we talking about big movement of, large-scale substances and products, or are we talking about smaller markets? Jordan, why don't you jump in on that one?
Both. I mean, the reality is we're talking about a world in which information, the bits about bits, are the most important thing around metadata. But those are pointers to value. That value could be something that you are going to deliver to me, or it could be something that comes over the gigabit fiber line in my apartment. And so I think we're talking about both of those. I think that information, data is the centerpiece of the world we're talking about. Mark Andreessen, in his famous essay, Software is Eating the World, talks about this. Your company would not be able to exist without software, so you could have all these trucks, you could have all these people, these lockers, but without software, it's nothing.
I mentioned in the introduction that you moved to Singapore relatively recently, and you've spoken about why you made that move, and I think it's relevant to this conversation.
So I really believe that the next 20 to 30 years of history are going to play out here in Southeast Asia. I believe that Singapore has the opportunity to be at the center of that, to be the pivot point, if you will. It's not ordained. That's why we have things like the Committee on the Future of the Economy to explore that and to figure out how we're going to do that. But that's possible. You look at what's happening and the position Singapore is in. The demographic trends in Indonesia, Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam. You look at the fact that here, today, 3.5 hours from here, 750 million people are reachable. And that group has so many needs, and there's so much growth and so much potential there. In Indonesia today, there are more resources locked up in the ground than there were in the beginning of the 20th century in the United States. So there's incredible potential. But what the opportunity that Singapore has is to bring kind of the knowledge economy to that and to provide that undergirding, to provide the network that helps this to be unlocked. I don't want to use the word exploited, but unlocked and opened up for people. But that's going to require that parents start thinking about their children being makers, building software, rather than being the classic lawyer, civil servant, investment banker, or doctor.
So it's interesting that you mentioned the network, because we're not just talking about businesses, we're talking about the logistics that go along with that. And we've got two people from opposite ends of the spectrum here, DHL and Prashant from Blue. So Prashant, how do you see the kind of logistics side of it coming into this?
So we see it as a need for a convergence in logistics. So it's more about a vertical integrated chain that can help retailers, brands, or even individual consumers, make use of this connectivity to be able to value add each other. So when it comes to retailers, it's not just about deliveries, it's about the whole upstream processes as well, and how we can service further away markets or a bigger region of people more effectively.
Tell us a bit about how Blue operates, because you've had to be nimble and you've had to be kind of hyper efficient. Tell us a bit about it.
So a bit of background. So Blue offers a whole ecosystem of logistics services, so right up from order management, warehousing, order fulfillment, and last mile logistics. We operate a network of self-collection parcel terminals. We call them Blue Ports. I think we're now the second largest network island-wide in Singapore. And the whole idea was to value add the consumer experience. So it's not about, there's no point you can deliver fast if you can't fulfill an item fast as well. So any bottleneck in the entire value chain is an eventual process bottleneck. So there was a need for using both automation at different stages of the value chain, as well as integration across this value chain in order to provide this whole end-to-end solution that effectively helps retailers and brands reach out to consumers. So for us, it's both the software, like Jordan mentioned, the hardware, as well as the infrastructure in order to help small and medium businesses effectively be able to offer the service level and scale that traditionally was only reserved for larger clients that use services from Charles or that.
Well, so Charles, what is your view on that? I mean, people hear DHL and they think shipping containers and planes and trucks, and that surely has to be inefficient when you're talking about big businesses.
Yeah.
And small businesses, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, look, we cover the smallest to the largest, but just before I go there, actually, I want to go back to the Silk Road very, very quickly. So I think the Silk Road is really interesting, and from an e-commerce perspective, if you look at, the bulk of the business is coming out of China. US is a big importer from China, but there's a lot coming back the other way as well. So I think it's two-way. Secondly, the way that commerce moves is changing very rapidly. So we now have the train that goes all the way through into the UK. So you can send potentially product all the way through from China, all the way through the UK. So there's a new sort of Silk Road creative, which I think is pretty amazing. And that'll touch a lot of parts, Southeast Asia, etc. as well. So I think that's going to grow, and it's going both ways. Secondly, the sort of cross-border e-commerce I think we've uniquely sort of referred to as the sort of new spice route. So if you look at Africa, for example, something like 50% of what they take into Africa comes out of China. So there's a huge new trade lane being created out of there. So, and then there's lots of other trade lanes being created, whether it be down to Latin America from China or from the US across to the UK or to Australia. So you've got these sort of main sort of arteries operating around the world. And of course, as you quite rightly pointed out, we play in a lot of those. But we play with the smallest to the very largest. And I mean, clearly, some of the bigger volume comes out of the larger customers, but I've met some really exciting startups here who will use DHL today or tomorrow. So we play in both spectrums, yeah.
Prashant, you've spoken before about the efficiency of delivery and how the last leg of delivery can be the hardest. Tell us a bit about what you've done to make that a more efficient process.
So for us, we deployed this whole network of parcel terminals. Now, parcel terminals obviously reduce the variability of deliveries. At the same time, actually value add the consumer experience because they don't have to deal with the stress, the anxiety, and the frustration of anticipating your parcel's arrival. And you can now collect at your own convenience. But we took that a step further and said that, hey, where are we going to locate these parcel terminals? And we decided to locate these along one's commuting journey. So, whether it's where you have breakfast or where you commute to work, where your office is, where you go for a movie or where you have dinner, these are all different touch points in a day where one might potentially want to receive items. So you could be signing up for a yoga class while at work and say, hey, I need a new yoga mat, and have it delivered quickly. We offer a same-day service level to a Blue Pot parcel terminal near your office on your way to that yoga class without having to deliver it home. So home isn't always the place where you might want to receive a parcel, and this really helps. It's a win-win situation for both the retailer, the logistics company, as well as the consumer.
Candice, you work with lots of different businesses. What are the kinds of problems they face?
So I think in this economy whereby the digital platform is so much more meaningful for businesses, the processes as such, businesses first start with trying to digitize their SKUs or their product, and then they try to build a discovery process in terms of how they think about marketing. And this might be very different from the traditional offline media. And the last part will be fulfillment, with as what DHL and Blue both help in the whole process. I think some of the challenges and issues that businesses face would be the whole actually chain. Firstly, how do you build a culture to try, how do you build a culture to even try new things? That's one. Two would be how do you bring in the skill sets to set up a digital platform and market digitally. And last but not least as well, how do you reach out to consumers in a way that that caters to how consumer behaves? I think a lot of people consume media differently now. It's not so much, people don't spend as much time on TVs, but rather with the small mobile screens. So in terms of businesses, for the ones that do not have establish modus operandi on how they think about digital media, is very much about how do you reinvent the process, right? And in terms of companies, big conglomerates, is how do you insert or give importance to doing things differently in terms of the new digital economy as well. And I think there is tremendous opportunity for established businesses as well as new businesses in the whole digital ecosystem.
Is there safety in numbers for small businesses in this part of Asia? I mean, is it better for them to buddy up with companies like yours, with their neighbor, or should they kind of focus and go it alone?
Sure. I think I think in terms of investments in businesses, it's better to always, from my point of view anyway, to partner and to see what you can how do you minimize your risk into new businesses as well. So I think partnering with platforms like ours, partnering with other businesses, so for example, marketplaces, there are many abound now in Southeast Asia. Putting your products, at least to test bid or test how the consumers respond to your product as well as offerings, will be a good safety step to start with before really investing in the whole ecosystem, because it's expensive. Most people think setting up businesses online is really cheap because there's no rent. I don't think that really is the case. I think there's a lot of infrastructure to be built, a lot of investments to be made in marketing as well as the tech infrastructure, as mentioned before. Yeah. So I think trying to minimize risk, at least at the start, will be important consideration.
Yeah, I agree. I think just to add to that, the sort of trend we're seeing is that smaller companies and small, medium-sized companies typically start out on a marketplace. I think you're absolutely right. It's a very easy way to operate either domestically or cross-border, and cross-border e-commerce is growing at 27%. Is very exciting. So most companies understand that and want to get on the bandwagon. So how do you do that? Do you want to spend time setting up your own web or whatever else, or do you want to set up your own sort of B2C ecosystem? Probably not, and you're absolutely right. I think most companies start off on marketplaces, but there is a growing trend that, certainly from the large companies, and it'll come down further, that there'll be sort of a twin speed approach. So you start off on a marketplace, start off on a sort of relatively low risk setup, but relatively quickly also you want to set up your own direct B2C, take back the customer, take back the profit pool. So we're seeing trends, certainly from the larger ones and going into the medium-sized customers, of companies doing parallel strategies to access a cross-border market.
But when you say cross-border, are we talking big scale east to west, or are we talking fairly regional?
If you look at that, I mean, the biggest markets take up the biggest volume, so UK, China, US, Australia. The bigger markets, France, Germany, they make up the biggest volume in e-commerce and also contribute to the biggest trade lanes. But what's also interesting, there are no small ones. They're all rapidly growing. So if you look at Latin America, it's growing at sort of double-digit growth. You've got countries like Brazil, which make up 40% of the e-commerce environment there. Mexico, Chile, where I was a few weeks ago and just started an operation. So Latin America growing real fast. Middle East, which until very recently was a relatively quiet, sleeping giant in the e-commerce space, and then Noon.com announced about 6 months ago with $1 billion investment, and then most recently Amazon's acquisition of Soup.com, the biggest marketplace in the Middle East. So the Middle East now is on everyone's agenda and looks very, very exciting. And then of course you've got Southeast Asia closer to home, which I personally believe, and to the point earlier, I think Southeast Asia is probably one of, if not the most exciting regions from an e-commerce perspective. 600 million people, highly computer literate, 58%, in Malaysia online, very young population, 44% of Filipinos below the age of 19, so young population, very used to shopping on their mobile device. So I think Southeast Asia, certainly from our perspective, we see Southeast Asia as a really exciting region. So hard to pick out one that's not, if I'm honest.
So if I can make a comment on that point, two things. Do people know how many mobile devices there are per person in Indonesia? It's 2.1. More mobile devices than people, by almost a factor of 2. The other thing is, and this is where I have the perspective because I started in this business writing software in 1981, is do you know how much more powerful that device that's sitting over there is than what I had throughout my university experience and when I started Apple in 1986? It is between 1,000 and 10,000 fold more powerful. And guess what? That's going to happen again over the next 5 years. Okay? What happened over that period is going to happen again. And we're going to be looking at a level of connectivity, a level of computing power. I mean, you look at some of the problems that are being solved now just because we have the computing power to throw at them. Recently was at the Google Cloud Platform Conference in San Francisco. And TensorFlow is something in terms of machine learning and artificial intelligence that people are very excited about. These used to be, things that required PhDs to operate and to run. And there was an exhibit there from a Japanese farmer who had set up a system to grade cucumbers with 12 hours of training on his part of TensorFlow. So think about that, something that was inherently something only people could do, and that only could be done with the most powerful computing power, is now something you can carry around in the palm of your hand and do during your commute over a week or two.
It's all well and good for the president of China to talk about wanting to recreate the Silk Road. But is having a big brother like China in your back garden, is that actually a detriment to smaller countries like Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand?
So I'm going to go out on a limb here. China's cut itself off from the world. Okay? I know they're out here, but it's primarily resource extraction. Okay? Who here has gone to China and tried to access GitHub? Okay? So if you're in software, GitHub is where it happens. Okay? If you want to be part of the global software community, you have to be able to get to GitHub. You can't get to it from China. It's blocked by the Great Firewall. Okay? So yes, China is out there. They are sending laborers out that are involved in resource extraction. They're sending laborers that are out that are building infrastructure. They're exporting labor effectively. But in terms of their ability to be engaged in the network that Candice and I are talking about, they've cut the links to it. So, it's really hard to have a conversation with people if you've ripped out the telephone lines.
Mm-hmm. Just to add on to that as well, I guess one thing that China definitely is doing is making its investments globally. So they can't access GitHub and a lot of networks within China, but what they do and they are able to then get access is really to then invest in ecosystems outside. Yes. So that's definitely something that a lot of Chinese companies are doing, especially if you look at Alibaba. I think another way to think about China would be Southeast Asia could look at China, which is a very advanced digital economy, to see where the blueprint would be and could be in possibilities of Southeast Asia as well. Of course, it wouldn't be identical, but it could give a decent roadmap on the possibilities as well.
Yeah, I agree. I tend to agree with you as well. I think the answer to your question is it's a good thing. And again, not so much related to Southeast Asia, but my 5 years in Africa, China was very heavily involved in infrastructure across Africa, and if they weren't, no one else was. So certainly from my perspective and my time in Africa, I saw a lot of good being done by their involvement, their investment, their engagement in Africa, and helping to drive commerce, build infrastructure, create connectivity, which otherwise wouldn't exist. And 1 billion people in Africa are going to do a lot of shopping over the next few years. It's very good for me as well. So I think it's a good thing. But I also tend to agree that if Southeast Asia or Singapore looks at, you can learn a lot as well. So if you look at sort of the percentage of product that's bought online in China, it's around about 18 to 20%, which is the highest in the world. So again, there's probably a lot, whereas in Southeast Asia it's between 0.5% in Indonesia through to 4 or 5% here in Singapore. So there's probably still a lot we can learn from their digitalization and how they've gone through that hurdle and how they've digitalized their environment and still digitalizing their environment. So I think generally it's a good thing, and generally there's a lot we can learn.
Prashant, for Blue, which is a local company, how will that kind of growth in Singapore, the growth of online retail, change your company, and how will you have to adapt?
I mean, so for us, we call ourselves a retail logistics company, so not an e-commerce logistics company, because definitely in the future for retail to survive, it's not being in one space or the other. It's not a dichotomy anymore. And it's really about how do you create a value-added consumer experience at all the various touch points in this whole network that we are talking about. And that's where you have to kind of take a different perspective, where many see e-commerce as a way of cost reduction. But if you flip that around, it's actually a way of how do I blend my digital world and my physical world and create a value-added experience throughout. So whether it's an omni-channel strategy or whether it's your consumer engagement, how do you build up that engagement, that loyalty, and present yourself as a value-added partner or provider of services or goods to the consumers at each of these different touch points. And that requires a bit of a perspective shift, and that things are not so much a dichotomy. And whatever that's coming out of the bigger markets, whether it's China, US, etc., I mean, there's definitely things that we can learn from them, but it's really about adapting those to the needs of the local market, because in a hyper-connected world, a consumer is going to get their goods from wherever they want. So it's about what they want, not necessarily where it's from. And if it's what they want, then we have to focus on the how. So it's about the consumer experience, the logistics, the engagement, and how do we deliver what they want, regardless of where it's from.
The room outside is full of mostly very local ideas and startups and companies. What are some of the challenges that they're going to face when they want to push beyond Singapore's border and they want to start going down that Silk Road?
So we recently did a bit of research on this with McKinsey and identified a number of sort of key considerations for any company that's thinking about going cross-border. So first and foremost, which country? Yeah, so where do I go? Where do I sell my product? So, for example, there's a chap out there who's got a fantastic electric bike. I'm sure you saw it, which hopefully we will use in 1 or 2 of our countries. I think it's fantastic. So anyway, so the question for him, I was talking to him, and the question for him is, which country does he go and sell it at? There's a lot of electric bike manufacturers out there in Denmark, in China, and a few others. So picking countries where there's not a lot of competition would be a good start. Picking countries that speak the same language, so identifying that. Secondly, then it's about, and depending on whether you go on a platform like a marketplace, or whether you do it yourself, localizing your website, so recognizing terminology, phraseology, imagery, incentives that work locally, so not everything works appropriately in all markets. I'll tell you a lovely story. When the country manager of Ethiopia rang me one day and said, on the back of an incentive program we were running where we were giving away frozen DVDs back in the days when DVDs were popular, and she said, Frozen's not really popular in Ethiopia. In fact, we don't have any cinemas. So I said, okay, so what are you going to do? And she said, we're going to give away chickens. I said, sorry? She said, chickens. I went, sure. And I said, how many? She went, no, I don't know, 10,000. And I said, just for my own edification, alive or dead? She said, alive. I said, okay, great. So, and sure enough, she went out and bought 10,000 chicken and then gave them away for every 5th shipment you brought into a DHL. So recognizing, you have to recognize that not everybody operates the way the UK operates or the way Germany operates or whatever else. So localizing your product the best you can. Fulfillment is becoming increasingly important. So I met with a gentleman earlier on today who's selling pre-packed quinoa bags. Really great, actually. And he's selling them into Indonesia, into Southeast Asia. And we talked about how it would be really relevant for him to move those products in bulk to a fulfillment center, low-cost fulfillment center, and then fulfill locally, which meets the on-demand needs. So I want that quinoa for my dinner tonight. If you say 3 days, you're probably not going to get the sale. So fulfillment and local fulfillment is becoming more and more important. And then last but not least, obviously picking the right delivery provider, somebody like Blue or DHL is my recommendation.
Candice, what about you? What do you think the toughest challenges faced by those outside will be when they want to cross those borders?
So I think a lot of businesses, at least for businesses in Singapore, have a bit of a adverse reaction or inertia to try to breach their businesses across the region, simply because of the lack of know-how, or rather the risk perceived, right? So I think in terms of trying to do digital businesses beyond the home country, that is going to be a necessity, especially whereby on the digital world, geographical boundaries mean lesser, unless it's about fulfillment. So I think in terms of like partnering platforms, or rather understanding what networks and understanding how consumers consume media in the different countries will be highly important. So ShopBack is a company that actually operates from Singapore, but we have grown to 6 countries over 2 years. And I think one thing that we have been very proud of is helping businesses scale regionally as well. And because we're a discovery platform, we help educate consumers in different markets on new products from other countries. But I think it's highly important to understand, as what Charles mentioned as well, how consumers behave differently and what's important to consumers in different markets. So I think developing that understanding is crucial. Yeah.
Prashant? Getting onto that Silk Road, if the firms outside want to push the borders, what are the challenges in your view?
I think there's a lot of fragmentation still across the different markets, especially in this region. So whether it's logistics or regulations or culture for that matter. So for us, it's not about expanding, but how do you replicate some of your success stories that you've developed in one market, bring it to another market, and then adapt it for the local needs. So it's not just a matter of just scaling up from one particular location and say, okay, now I've gone to many different markets, but still primarily with the perspective from a single market, but how do you localize that? And I think that's where, at least from an operational logistics perspective, there's a need for different companies to partner each other at different stages of the whole value chain. So for example, we work a lot with DHL for the express business. They do the cross-border, we do the local, and that's where you can value add the consumers and say, hey, not everyone's an expert in every single aspect of the whole value chain, and let's work with those who know the local market better and leverage their expertise and their market knowledge in order to reach out to the consumers and expand.
Jordan?
Would you mind if I actually turned the question around on you?
Yeah. So you moved to Singapore because you love it here. You say there's such great potential and opportunity. Those new start companies outside, they want to get over that border.
I'd like to pitch them on the fact that they have a wealth that they don't realize, the young people here in Singapore. So Candice, average Singaporean, when do they leave home?
For work? Or?
When they leave home, when do they move out of their parents' house?
Oh,
28.
Late. 30.
28, 29.
Yeah, so you graduate from uni, 22, 23. Mm-hmm. You, at some point, you ask someone to buy an HDB with you, 31, 32. So you just had 8, 10 years where your monthly burn could be around $400 a month. Do you know how many entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley would kill to have a personal burn of $400 a month? Do you know how much equity you can hold on to because you didn't have to take investment? It's incredible. If you're willing to face the fear of failure, that risk of failure, which if you're going to want to do anything significant, you're going to have to do, you are so well positioned to do it. Couple that with the incredible support from the government, the various programs that have been rolled out, and the world-class universities and the world-class education you have, and think about what you can do. Think about what you can do. Don't worry about the failure. Don't worry about that you're young. Look at the opportunity you have. Carousell would not exist if 3 young men had not taken that risk and literally had not taken a salary for 18 months, okay? And they were able to do that before they got any funding, before they got any salary. That's why this company exists. And that is the wealth that every young Singaporean has. In a sense, you could say that is your birthright. So take that and run with it.
I'm going to allow a few questions in a couple of minutes. I'm going to stick with you for the moment, Jordan. We've spoken about physical products and getting on that Silk Road, but we live in a sharing economy, and I can sit in my home in London and I can, book someone in India to transcribe, a document for me. How much is that significant in the electronic Silk Road? How much are these kind of purely soft, purely digital transactions?
So the fact is that borders have fallen in terms of basically labor and such. That even where you have a place where you can't move people, into an economy or out of an economy, which, bless Singapore, it's very open about, as opposed to the country of my birth. And so it is significant, it is changing that. But here's the even bigger kicker. That transcriber, when are they going to be replaced by a TensorFlow algorithm? And who is going to build those TensorFlow algorithms? Who is going to create those? Who is going to be doing that incredible value add at the top of the chain? We need more makers. We need more people that are going to build businesses that are built on software. We need people who have read Mark Andreessen's Software is Eating the World, and both are incredibly energized by it and terrified by the message that it has. That's the key. Yes, the barriers have fallen. The ability to collaborate across distance, across time, they've fallen. These are big things, and these are the realities of the world that we exist in. But at the end of the day, it's going to be about who is building the greatest value add in software.
Prashant, Blue is a company that can be efficient and nimble and turn its hand quickly, but you only have so much in terms of resources and you have to choose carefully. On the other hand, we've got DHL, which has global resources, international reach, but big companies, they turn as slow as an oil tanker. Who has the upper hand?
I think we both have one hand that need to clap together. For us, yes, you're right, we do have the ability to be a bit more nimble. Obviously, when it comes to scale, then the global resources does help. So I think it's really about working together and saying that, hey, we have an expertise or build up a niche expertise in this area, and you guys have the scale and you can move the bulk movements in all these big trade lanes. And it's really about maximizing each other's resources and investments. So for example, what we have is a set of infrastructure that not necessarily is just for e-commerce, but can be used for all sorts of different distribution of goods. So e-commerce traditionally seen as B2C, but hey, you can do it for C2C as well, C2B, and a lot of other different models as well, where previously you couldn't. And this can facilitate the development of other projects or other areas of expansion that bigger companies are looking at doing as well, because hey, there used to be a missing link, and now that link is filled by someone else which has specific expertise, which can offers a platform for collaboration.
Charles?
I'm very biased, so I would say DHL. No, I think it's a really interesting environment for large organizations today. So, there's a statistic that says, that a lot of the Fortune 500 companies from sort of 10 years ago don't exist anymore because they just were disrupted. And we spend a huge amount of time today as DHL working out how do we remain relevant for tomorrow. Yeah, so the sort of legacy business for Deutsche Post DHL, which is a mail division, I was at a show the other day, and I asked a show of hands who's written a letter in the last 12 months. Has anybody written a letter in the last 12 months? Handwritten a letter? Or emailed a letter? No, probably not. So, the letter business doesn't really exist anymore. So for us, it's all about owning tomorrow and becoming a very different organization, hence why DHL eCommerce was formed in 2014, all about how we position ourselves to be a leader in e-commerce related logistics activities. It's also about us learning to be a lot more agile, a lot more nimble, a lot more friendlier and happier with risk, a lot more happier around how we look at investments and returns. So as an organization, we're going through a huge learning curve, but it's something it's quite enjoyable to be part of and quite enjoyable to watch. Some people find it a lot easier than others, and I know many other large organizations are going through the same thing, but you have to. You absolutely have to. The one thing that we have going in our favor is that DHL started as a startup. So we started in 1969, 3 people in San Francisco, the D, the Dalsey, H, Hillbloom, and L, Lin, were 3 gentlemen who met in a coffee shop and formed what is now the world's largest mail, express and logistics company, so employing more than 500,000 employees. And so we have innovation on our side, and we've constantly innovated and constantly sort of re-engineered ourselves. So that's going in our favor, but it's not easy. It's not easy. So interesting journey for us.
We have a couple of minutes left. I'm not sure if there are some microphones floating around the floor. Does anyone have any questions about getting on the Silk Road that our panel might be able to answer? No one putting their hand up? That's fine, because I'm curious as to products you guys have seen that you know is just ripe for pushing those borders and crossing continents.
I mean, I've seen a lot of robotics outside. I think that's, in our space anyway, that's whether it be in fulfillment, last mile, cross-border, again to the point earlier about the person translating or a machine translating. It's the same for us, in pick and pack and delivery and all of those areas. Technology is absolutely critical to eking out every single percentage point of efficiency. So we spend and invest a huge amount of time in tech and in research and in that side of things. I saw a lot of things out here which I think are great. Second one would be green technology. Again, I mentioned the electric bike. We've just made a commitment to have a zero carbon footprint by 2050 as an organization, which is ongoing given that we have more than 300 planes and hundreds of thousands of vehicles. So anything that in the green space I think is very sensible, and we want to do well but do good. And lastly, I think anything that creates a better customer experience, so whether it be VR or AI or whatever it may be. So things, the differentiation points. Today, there is still some gap where we can fairly easily differentiate with core elements like service quality or whatever else, but those will get closer and tighter. So how do you differentiate in 5, 10, 15 years' time? So anything that adds a lot of differentiation is really key for us. So those three things I saw out there, which were really exciting.
Anyone else? Anything they've
So I would say that the majority of the things I saw out here are solving what I'll call real problems. One of the things I got tired about in Silicon Valley was yet another application designed to solve the problem of the 1% of the first world, or even the 1% of the 1%. And I think if you go out and you look at the problems that are around here, you talked about green, fresh water. How many people don't even have fresh water? Water to drink, to clean with, reliable power, reliable communications. All of these things, those are the problems that I'm excited about seeing solutions to, and there are a number out here. And I think that part of the reason we see that is because we're closer to the problems. If you're in Silicon Valley, jump on a plane in 5 hours, where are you? You just made it to the East Coast, or you're somewhere in the middle of the Pacific. You're not here. You can go and take a few days, and you can be seeing what's at the bottom 1%, not the top 1%, and understanding those problems and working for solutions. And again, as I said, if you're a young Singaporean and you have that birthright to hang on to, you can then go take the time to solve that problem. And that is where wealth is. If you haven't read the book, The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid, I highly recommend it. Everybody should read it.
Just to echo on Jordan's point as well, I think in Singapore, perhaps we lack visibility of some of the very basic problems that the rest of Southeast Asia faces, right? In terms of access to goods. I mean, in Philippines, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in the more second, third tier cities, malls are not even really much established, and road infrastructure isn't set up as well. With the proliferation of mobile devices, I think now consumers really have a very different accessibility to goods. I think in the US, getting a toothpaste, getting Nike, getting any brand, it's just really just a drive down. In some of the second, third tier cities, perhaps, it's not even feasible without the advent of mobile commerce. So I think what's exciting, as what Jordan mentioned as well, in Southeast Asia is that technology really enables an improved quality of life. And I think that's very, very meaningful to be part of the journey to help enable that.
And that's a nice note on which to finish. We're out of time. Please join me in thanking my panel, Jordan, Prashant, Candice, and Charles.
Thank you. Thank you.